All right, so we should be back. We should be live with the weekly shred. So my name is Jim Schultz with F Cubed and livefcubed.com. And man, I hope you guys are doing pretty well out there. We should be live only on YouTube out there on the old interwebs, as I think I'm gonna push all my chips in the middle on the old YouTube moving forward. So if you guys are checking this out live, hey, drop me a comment in the chat box. They should come up to me on that screen over there, but you know, that's just in theory. We'll have to wait and see what actually happens in practice. But this is it, man. It's Thursday night. What I'm trying to do here on the weekly shred is just give you all what you need to, you know, change your physique, to do the things that you want to do with how your body looks. That's what the weekly shred is all about. And so tonight I wanted to talk about fat loss without counting macros. So guys, so straight up, man, like, I can't even believe I'm about to say this. I can't even believe that I'm actually thinking this, but I have decided to not track macros for, let's say, at least the next 3, 4, 5 weeks, at least through the month of September. And I started doing this just about maybe 4 or 5 days ago, just to give my old mind, my old body, my old soul a little bit of a break away from, you know, the tracking macros merry-go-round. And so let me know out there if you guys are some macro trackers. Let me know out there if you guys kind of like to keep track and keep tabs on the nutrition that's going into your body. So the reason why I'm doing this and why I think it might be helpful for you is this. If you're going to have a good relationship with food, like if you're going to have a long-term healthy relationship with food, then you need to allow yourself to have periods of time like this. Like, you need to allow yourself to have periods of time where, you know, you add a lot of flexibility into your diet, you take a break away from tracking macros. You know, you could call it intuitive eating if you wanted to call it intuitive eating. I actually kind of hate that term. I do not like that term at all, because I think it just gives people a license, or they think they have a license to basically just eat whatever they want, and they should get the physique that they want. And that is not at all how it works. That is not at all how it has ever worked. And so that's not even what intuitive eating is trying to accomplish. And so I guess you could, you know, I suppose you could say, you know, what I'm going to do right now is called intuitive eating. I mean, there is an entire lesson inside of Full Throttle Fat Loss that is about intuitive eating. So I suppose I have to be okay with that. But whatever you want to call it, right? I'm going to take a few weeks and I'm going to take a break. If you want to have a long-term healthy relationship with food, it's very, very important that you take time away like this. Now again, you know, this could come in a couple of different forms. It doesn't have to necessarily be time away from tracking macros. It can just be added flexibility in your diet. Because guys, listen, maybe you're like me, right? If you're like me, you've got an inner caged fat kid inside of you, right? If you're like me, and you guys know my story, I'm not going to rehash it here. If you're like me, right, just kind of seeing where the wind blows you with your macros, just kind of seeing like, hey, whatever happens with my macros, like, that doesn't usually work out super well for me. And so that's why I was so hesitant to do this, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 days ago. But you might be in a similar situation. You might also feel like, you know, if I take my hands off the wheel a little bit too much, right? If I take my eye off the ball for too long, then I run the risk of never coming back. Like, I run the risk of, you know, not being able to keep things in line, not being able to keep things in check, because my body just naturally wants to eat a ton of food. Like, my body just naturally wants to crush sleeves of Oreos, right? I mean that's my story, right? That's kind of where I'm coming from. That's what I'm battling every single day. I mean, obviously, you know, it's been decades now since I've kind of lived that life, but it's still inside. It's still down there. And if I'm not careful, man, he'll bust out, and then the next thing you know, he's loose in the woods. We can't find him, and who knows what comes next, right? Not a good scenario. So maybe you're in a similar situation, right? Maybe you're in a similar situation where you're like, I really don't like to keep my eye off the ball. I really don't like to take my hands off the wheel. Then, maybe tracking macros all the time is kind of going to be your jam, your jelly, your donut. That's what it is for me, honestly. But still, always trying to find the next level of improvement, right? Always trying to get just a little bit better. And so in that vein, right, kind of thinking along those lines, I'm like, let's give it a shot, man. Let's give it a shot. Let's take a little time off and let's try to achieve fat loss without tracking macros. So that kind of brings me to the other element here, right? Can you achieve fat loss without tracking macros? Absolutely, unequivocally, no. No, I'm just kidding. Absolutely, unequivocally, yes. Of course you can. Right? Tracking macros is not the only way to reach your goals. Tracking macros is not the only way to, change your physique. I mean, that's absolutely true. However, what's also true is I firmly believe it's the easiest way. I firmly believe it is the clearest way, because when you understand your macros and you understand how you're fueling your body, making the necessary changes becomes very, very clear and obvious and simple to do, honestly. But it's not the only way to achieve fat loss. And so what I'm going to attempt to do for the next month or so is, we're still kind of cleaning off that quarantine bulk, right? I mean, just to be fully transparent with y'all, I mean, I ballooned up. I was in the 213s at the peak of my quarantine mushiness. I've now settled down back to around 207, which is still a little bit on the high side for where I like to normally live in the off season. I'm usually closer to like 200 or in the high 190s. So I was like, okay, let's try to clean things up a little bit more. Let's try to take things down into the 190s, into the 190s, 200s, and kind of see what happens from there. And so for you guys out there, if you're thinking about taking some time away from macros, if you're thinking about, saying, yeah, I would really like to be able to do that. I would really like to be able to cut some fat. I would really like to be able to, clean things up a little bit. Maybe you have a little bit of a quarantine bulk yourself, right? I mean, let's call it like it is. Let's call a spade a spade. Let's call a heart a heart, man. Like, let's not run away from the problem. Let's embrace it. If that's the case, you don't have to track macros to get there. You absolutely don't. If you've never tracked macros before, then I think you probably should. Right? I think you should probably go the other direction, right? Because you're kind of on the other side of the fence that I'm trying to get to here, right? You're kind of on the other side of the fence that, we're trying to hop over to. You should hop over to our side for a little while, right? Like, you should come over into our house for a little while. Don't worry, the fridge is fully stocked. And all the Tupperware is labeled with the macro breakdowns. We make it super easy for you. But I think that if you don't have any experience with tracking macros, then you need to gain some experience, because it's an extremely valuable tool. But if you're out there and you've been tracking macros for a while and you want to take a little bit of a break, you can absolutely do that and still, hit your fat loss goal. So how do you do that? Like, what am I going to focus on, and what should you focus on if you want to go in that direction? Well, here are a few things to think about. The first thing is this: your hunger and your satiation cues are going to play a much bigger role than they have, before. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think it's sort of obvious, just kind of the way that I said that and the way I kind of framed it. But when you track macros, like, you're all in. You're all in on the plate. I'm all in on the plate in front of me. Like, I'm looking down and I can see the chicken. All that chicken, it's getting housed. I'm looking down. I can see all that oatmeal. You better believe I'm licking the bowl when this thing's all said and done, right? It makes it pretty easy, right? Like, you put the plate of food in front of me, and it gets crushed, and that's the end of that. But when you're not tracking macros, now all of a sudden it's like everything is open season, right? Like, I'm just out in the wild on this terrain, and I don't exactly know how to navigate forward, right? I don't have, the numbers to guide me. I don't have, the plates to guide me. And so now all of a sudden it's like, man, I actually have to think about this, right? I actually have to, like, use my brain to figure out if I'm hungry or not, which is ironic, because I actually think that tracking macros makes you use your brain. But this is going to make you use your brain in an entirely different way that maybe you have shut down for the last, 13 or 14 years, hypothetically. And so in that scenario, it can be a little tricky, right? It can be a little tricky. And so that's another reason why I think this is not a terrible exercise for me to go through and for you to potentially go through. Some period of time, it doesn't have to be anything crazy, 3, 4, 6, 8 weeks, whatever, where you kind of retool your hunger satiation cues, right? Like you kind of revive these guys so that you remember what it's like to feel hungry, right? Although I mean, everybody who's dieted knows what it's like to feel hungry, right? But you remember what it's like to feel full. I think that's probably a little bit more accurate, a little bit more relevant to kind of what we're talking about here. So I remember what it's like to feel full, right? Where a lot of times I would eat beyond fullness, right? Like if I had a plate of food in front of me and it was X number of macros, like all kidding aside, it's very rare that I would leave something on that plate. And so if I was like stuffed, I would just keep eating, knowing that, you know, at the end of the day or the end of the week, it's all going to even out because all the macros are on point. But this is an altogether new challenge, right? This is an altogether new task where now all of a sudden it's like I've got to realize when I'm full. I've got to think about this a little bit more. And so lean on your hunger and satiation cues. That's the first piece of advice that I have for you. The second piece of advice that I would have for you is maintain your same meal structure to the best of your ability. And so again, we're out in the wild, right? Like we're trying to, you know, carve out a little bit of progress on the scale. Like we're trying to get a little bit better, you know, with our physiques, even though we're not tracking macros. How should we view that? Well, the hunger, the satiation is going to play a big role. Here's another thing though. You don't want to give yourself too much freedom. At least I know I don't want to give myself too much freedom, and maybe you kind of share a similar story. So by continuing to eat 4 or 5 times a day, which is what I typically do almost all the time, my body is already in that rhythm, right? Like my body is already ready for that. You know, my body clock already gets hungry at certain times of the day that fits with the feeding schedule that I've had for myself for many, many years now. And so I'm like, I'm not going to jank with that. Like, why would I jank with that? It doesn't even make any sense, right? Like, why would I go in and start messing with that? I'm already removing some huge variables from the equation. And so let me try to maintain some sense of normalcy here, you know? But, of course, the real benefit is, and this has already happened to me a couple times the last few days, is it's like, you know, if I'm hungry, if I'm a little extra hungry at like a great example for me is like 3 p.m., right? If I'm hungry at like 3 p.m. when I don't normally have a meal kind of scheduled or that I would usually have, now I just have a little something. I just have, you know, a banana, or I have, you know, a few nuts, or I have whatever. I just have a little snack to kind of get me through, to kind of serve as a way station, right, to get me from lunch to dinner. And so because I have a little bit more freedom now, because I'm not weighing my food, I'm not tracking my macros, and all of those things, it's like, yeah, that's really probably not that big of a deal. But I would encourage you to maintain your same meal structure, you know, 4 or 5 times a day, if that's what you normally do, or 3 times a day, or 6 times a day, or, you know, just kind of what, you know, whatever you normally do. That's what I would, I would go ahead and I would maintain that. So, okay. So the next thing is what I would, let's see here. The next thing that I would consider is I would consider the benefits from this, right? The benefits are, I think longer term, you're going to end up with a better relationship with food. And the reason why is this. I think that when we're not dieting, when we're not in a shred season, when we're not officially trying to get leaner, a lot of us feel like, man, there's this sleeve of Oreos on that stove, and it's cheat day or treat day or whatever. Oof, I gotta crush those Oreos. Like, it's not up for negotiation. Like, this is not a debate. Like, this has to happen. Hey, I'm at a buffet with my friends, and I haven't been at a buffet, and it's been at least 6 days now. I've got to have 3 desserts. Not 1, not 2. We're going for the trifecta on that dessert bar over there. Right? I think that's how a lot of us feel when we kind of break free from, you know, shred season or tracking macros or whatever. Well, this is going to train us that it doesn't have to be that way. This is going to train us that it absolutely doesn't have to be that way at all. And so that's the thing that I am most excited about improving with my own relationship with food. I've come a long way. I've come a really long way in, you know, 17, 18, 19 years or however long it's been, but I still got a ways to go. I'm still learning, I'm still improving, and I still have, you know, that inner caged fat kid that wants to come out, that wants to crush 3 desserts, you know, at the buffet, you know, just because he can. And so those are a few things that I think might help you guys out. You know, if you're thinking about breaking free from macros yourself, and you're thinking about, you know, trying to move the scale south a little bit without tracking macros, I think that this would, I think these things would really help you. And hey, if I can help with anything else, man, you guys know where to find me. Just hit me up, on email, jschultzf3@gmail, or you can hit me up anywhere on social media. I'm just jschultzf3 across the board. Give Live F Cubed a look. There's a lot of fitness, finance content on there, or a lot of fitness and faith content on there, a little bit of finance content on there, but most of my finance stuff is obviously through Tasty Trade, so you guys can give that a look as well. And that's it, man. That's the weekly shred tonight. It looked like we may have had all kinds of issues over on YouTube, and so one of these days I'll figure it out, man. I promise. But that day may not be today. So we'll see you guys next week, hopefully.